Imagine the greatest boxer in history, opening his wallet not for himself, but to change the lives of strangers. Muhammad Ali didn't just fight in the ring, he fought against inequality, hunger, and the oblivion of those who had nothing. Muhammad Ali was known for his extraordinary talent, sharp mouth, and courage to face any opponent inside and outside the ring. But behind the golden gloves and the millions earned in purses from historic fights, there was a man who wasn't content simply to accumulate wealth. He believed that true greatness lay not in how much money you could keep, but in how much you could give back to the world. As a result, much of his fortune ended up in places almost no one saw, on forgotten streets, in anonymous families, in precarious hospitals, and in schools without walls. Ali believed that every victory in the ring was also a chance to lift others up. Many saw him simply as the provocative champion, but there was a hidden side, silent and generous, that of the man who knocked on strangers' doors to leave envelopes of cash, that of the idol who financed the education of poor young people, that of the millionaire who preferred to sit on the floor with beggars rather than settle into luxurious banquets. And it is precisely in this duality, the global star and the common man, that one of the most powerful stories in sport lies hidden. In this video, you'll discover how Muhammad Ali used his fortune not only to ensure his comfort, but to transform the lives of ordinary people who never imagined their fate would be touched by the most famous fist on the planet. We'll explore real-life incidents, testimonies from those who received help, and even secrets that only came to light after his death. Money, for him, was not an end in itself, but a tool, and each act of generosity concealed a lesson that resonates to this day. It's not enough to be the greatest, you have to be human. It was a cold night in Louisville, her hometown. While most of the neighborhood slept, a simple woman, a single mother of 3, woke up worried about the bills she couldn't pay. The rent was late, the refrigerator was nearly empty, and hope seemed to have faded within that humble home. But that morning, something unexpected happened. When she opened the door to get the newspaper, she found a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was enough money to pay off her debts and fill her pantry. She never discovered who it was from, but neighbors kept saying, it was Ali, it had to be Ali. Muhammad Ali walked the streets of Louisville like an invisible giant. He knew his fortune was the fruit of sweat, pain, and victories. But he also believed that money only had value when used for others. He often went out alone, unguarded, carrying small packages or envelopes stuffed with bills. When asked why, he simply smiled and said, "What God gave me is not just mine, it's theirs too." His generosity was not spectacle. There were no cameras, no flashes. It was silence. It was humanity. This episode of The Envelope on the Doorstep wasn't unique. There are dozens of similar accounts, stories that recurred in poor neighborhoods, in desperate families, in people who suddenly received the champion's invisible hand. A taxi driver recounted years later that, while taking Ali to the airport, he heard the boxer ask about his life. The man, embarrassed, revealed that he didn't have the money to pay for his daughter's schooling. Ali took a wad of bills from his pocket and discreetly placed them in the glove compartment. "Her education is your victory, but it's also mine," he said before leaving. What was striking wasn't just the gesture itself, but the naturalness with which Ali performed it. He didn't see it as charity, but as duty. From a young age, when he was still Cassius Clay, he learned from his parents that a community only thrives when each person bears a little of the burden of the other. When he became a millionaire, he only multiplied this philosophy, transforming it into acts that changed entire lives in seconds. This generous side of Ali contrasts sharply with his public persona, marked by sharp phrases, provocations, and an almost arrogant confidence in the ring. But, in truth, the same courage that led him to challenge champions also led him to confront the invisible pain of the poor. For him, it wasn't enough to be remembered as the greatest fighter. He wanted to be remembered as someone who didn't turn his back on the forgotten. And it was precisely this contradiction that made him even greater. The man who proclaimed himself the most beautiful knelt beside beggars to hear their stories. The champion who won millions in historic fights preferred to use part of that money to put food on the table of those who had nothing. In the end, that envelope on the door wasn't just paper money. It was a symbol, a silent reminder that true greatness isn't measured by how much you accumulate, but by how much you're willing to share. And that was just the beginning. What Muhammad Ali did outside the ring, in terms of generosity, became as great as his titles, because, deep down, every act of kindness was also a struggle against injustice, against indifference, and against oblivion. You'll discover how this philosophy of life led Ali to transform entire hospitals and schools, investing not just in discreet pockets, but in projects that impacted thousands of people, without ever wanting to take credit. Because, as he said, if my money doesn't help others, then it's worthless. By the mid-1970s, Muhammad Ali was more than just a world heavyweight champion. He was a global phenomenon, recognized everywhere. But while crowds gathered to see his open training sessions, while arenas filled to watch his million-dollar fights, Ali found time to be in places almost no one wanted to go. The quiet corridors of public hospitals. These weren't scheduled visits with cameras and reporters. Often, he appeared unannounced, walking among patients, hugging frail children, and sitting beside men and women who had lost hope. Nurses and doctors are recorded as describing how the mood of an entire ward would change with his arrival. It was as if the pain lessened just by seeing him smile. A Chicago hospital worker once recounted, there he didn't just shake hands, he financed treatments. When he saw a desperate family unable to pay for surgery, he would discreetly call a trusted doctor and cover the costs. Let me pay the bill, he would say, without letting the beneficiaries know who had paid. For him, anonymity was part of the magic. Kindness was more valuable when it didn't require applause. An emblematic case occurred at a children's hospital. An 8-year-old girl, diagnosed with leukemia, dreamed of meeting the champion. Upon learning her story, Ali not only visited her but returned several times, bringing gifts, talking with her parents, and helping to pay for the treatment that prolonged the child's life. On one of these visits, while holding her hand, he heard the little girl say, "You are the champion of the world, but for me, you are the champion of my heart." Ali cried. She cried like she rarely did. The scene remained etched in the memories of those present. In addition to helping individuals, Ali began investing in larger structures. In his hometown, he contributed to the renovation of clinics and equipment donations. In other states, he funded entire wards for underprivileged communities. For him, healthcare should not be a privilege, but a right. He once stated in an interview, "If a man can pay millions to see a fight, then that same money can save thousands of lives. It's just a matter of choice." These gestures weren't just about healing physical ailments, they were also about restoring dignity. Walking through hospital corridors, Ali would kneel, make faces to distract children, and imitate his famous taunts, but this time without opponents, simply to elicit laughter. A nurse reported that a boy who hadn't smiled in weeks started laughing again when Ali faked a knockout punch against him, theatrically falling to the floor of his room. This was the champion's power, to heal with his presence, with his words, with his actions. But behind this giant heart lay a dilemma. Many businessmen and agents told him he spent too much, that he needed to preserve his fortune, that he shouldn't get so involved in social causes. "You can't save the whole world," they said. Ali replied simply, "If I can save one person, it's worth the effort. That's my fight outside the ring." He knew that every dollar donated wouldn't make him richer, but he believed that every life touched brought him closer to what he called true victory. And if you've been following this far, now's the time I ask you to support this journey too. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment on what you think of this side of Muhammad Ali. This story needs to reach more people, and with your support, we can carry forward this message of humanity that the champion left as his legacy. And to help us continue uncovering these real stories and improving the quality of our content, consider purchasing our e-book. You'll find the direct link in the first link in the description. Your support makes all the difference. You'll discover how Ali extended this mission beyond hospitals, funding schools, supporting poor youth, and believing that education was the true arena where the future was decided. Because, as he said, fighting for a title is important, but fighting for a child's future is fighting for the world's tomorrow. For Muhammad Ali, every child without schooling was like a fighter entering the ring without gloves, vulnerable, exposed, doomed to lose a fight they never asked to fight. He understood that knowledge was the only weapon capable of freeing the poor from the invisible prison of misery. And that's why, even at the height of his fame, he began allocating part of his fortune to fund scholarships, build schools, and support young people who would never have the chance to step foot in a classroom. In Louisville, his hometown, Ali helped build educational projects for marginalized black communities, often overlooked by the government. He believed that providing food and medicine wasn't enough. They needed to provide a future. The stomach is full for a day, but the mind is fed forever, he would say. Over the years, dozens of young people from that region gained the opportunity to study, thanks to the money Ali discreetly sent. Some became teachers, lawyers, even doctors. Many only discovered as adults that the invisible angel behind the tuition was the same champion they saw on the posters hanging in the streets. In one of the most memorable episodes, Ali visited a school in Atlanta that was on the verge of closing due to lack of resources. The desks were broken, there weren't enough books, and the teachers were receiving late salaries. The champion didn't announce his arrival. He walked through the front door, walked through the hallways filled with peeling walls, and asked the principal directly, "What do you need to keep these children here?" She, with tears in her eyes, replied, "I need everything, but most of all, I need hope." Ollie said nothing. He simply wrote a check and handed it to her. No speech, no flashes. That same month, the school was renovated and remained open. In addition to financial donations, Ollie made a point of speaking to students. He would enter classrooms, take books from children's hands, and say phrases that would stick with them forever. Never believe you can't. The world will try to convince you of that every day, but you have to fight like I fight in the ring. Only your fight is here, with the pen and the book. The children looked at him as if they were standing before a superhero, and, in a way, they were. On another occasion, during a trip to Africa, Ollie came across villages where children walked kilometers barefoot to study in makeshift classrooms made of mud and wood. He was so impressed that he financed the construction of entire schools in parts of Nigeria and Senegal. For him, solidarity knew no boundaries. Education, he believed, was a bridge connecting all peoples, and investing in it was the duty of any man with resources. But this commitment didn't come without criticism. Some businessmen close to him warned that he was burning money on causes that wouldn't bring him any return. They believed the boxer should focus on business, multiplying his fortune and ensuring eternal comfort for his family. Ollie, however, saw beyond that. For him, his legacy wasn't a mansion or a luxury car, but a generation of young people who could dream bigger thanks to the opportunities he helped create. "If I die tomorrow," he once told a friend, "I want someone to say, he didn't just leave behind fights, he left behind better lives." The impact was profound. Years later, many of the young people who benefited from his donations recounted how a simple gesture completely changed the course of their lives. One young woman said that, thanks to the anonymous support she received, she was able to become a teacher. Upon discovering that Ollie was responsible, she said, "He didn't just pay for my education, he taught me that I, too, can change someone's life." This is how Muhammad Ali saw education, not as a luxury, but as a silent ring where the true battle for the future of humanity took place. He knew his fight wasn't just against opponents like Joe Frazier or George Foreman. The most important fight was against ignorance, inequality, and the cruel fate that stole the dreams of poor children. And it was this battle for education that solidified his image not just as a boxing champion, but as a champion of humanity. Because, in the end, the greatest punch Ollie ever threw wasn't against an opponent in the ring, but against the invisible chains that bound the weakest. Let's see how this spirit of generosity took him beyond classrooms and hospitals, reaching international causes, entire communities, and even victims of war, transforming Ollie into a voice that transcended borders and became a symbol of hope on a global scale. Muhammad Ali never limited himself to thinking in terms of borders. For him, suffering was suffering, whether it occurred in Louisville, New York, Africa, or the Middle East. Whenever he heard about communities at war, forgotten populations, or regions ravaged by famine, something inside him stirred. It was as if the voice of his conscience shouted louder than the noise of packed arenas. He understood that his name had power, that his presence opened doors, that his fortune could, in fact, save lives in places the world preferred to ignore. One of the most memorable episodes occurred during the Liberian Civil War. Ollie was invited to visit refugee camps. Many expected only a symbolic appearance, a photo, perhaps a quick speech. But when he arrived, he did much more. He directly financed the purchase of food, medicine, and tents, distributing resources that arrived with him, not from governments or institutions. He walked among malnourished children, held babies in his arms, and promised he would return. His team tried to convince him to keep his distance for safety reasons, but Ollie was adamant. "What good is it to be called a champion if I run away from the true ring of humanity?" This spirit also led him to the Middle East, where he engaged in peacekeeping missions and delicate negotiations. In 1990, before the Gulf War, Ollie traveled to Iraq to meet with Saddam Hussein in a risky endeavor, negotiating the release of American prisoners. The mission seemed impossible, and many believed it would be mere political propaganda. But Ollie, already weakened by the onset of Parkinson's symptoms, crossed the world fearlessly. He took no gloves, no belts, he took only his word and his reputation. And, to the world's astonishment, he achieved what seemed unattainable. Dozens of hostages were released after that conversation. At the press conference, Ali summed it up. I'm not a politician. I'm just a man who can't bear to see families crying. These international efforts weren't isolated. He also funded feeding programs in drought-stricken African countries, supported entire villages in Sudan, and helped raise funds for earthquake and flood victims around the globe. Wherever there was tragedy, there was a chance Ali would show up. Often he discreetly sent money through foundations without his name on them. For him, charity that needs to be publicized loses some of its purity. A little-known detail was his relationship with children in war zones. In Kosovo in the 1990s, he supported shelters for young orphans who had lost everything. These children don't know who I am, he once said, but I know who they are. They are the future, and the future needs to be protected, even if I never see the results. This was the thought that drove him, planting seeds in devastated land, even without the guarantee of a harvest. Ali also used his voice at conferences and global gatherings. In emotionally charged speeches, he criticized the indifference of wealthy nations to hunger and poverty. We cannot live in mansions while millions live in tents. If we believe in God, we must act as his children. These words came not from a diplomat, but from a man who had already tasted glory and yet preferred to side with the invisible. But there were also internal conflicts. Many of his agents and friends warned him, "You're taking too many risks. You're spending money that could provide for your family for generations." Ali listened, but responded calmly, "If I die rich and the world remains poor, my victory is worthless. I'd rather die poor, but knowing I left something behind besides my name." This dilemma plagued his life, but his conviction was greater than any financial calculation. On every international mission, in every makeshift hospital, in every refugee camp, Ali reaffirmed that the true fight was not in the fists, but in the heart. With every gesture, he showed that the legendary boxer was only part of his story. The other, even more immortal part, was that of the man who faced the world's pain as if it were his own. Even weakened by illness, Ali continued to help, inspire, and prove that his greatest victory was never won in a ring but in the hearts of the people he saved. In the final years of his life, Muhammad Ali no longer possessed the same agility that had once made him soar across the ring. Parkinson's, the cruel disease that plagued him for decades, had taken away some of his movements, robbed him of his poise, and, in many instances, his voice. But there was something the disease never managed to take away: his presence, his aura, and, above all, his desire to continue helping. Even weakened, Ali remained a beacon for millions of people around the world. His fortune, though no longer as abundant as in his heyday, was still channeled into social causes. And, more than money, he offered what had always been his greatest wealth: hope. Ali continued to travel, despite his physical limitations. His family tried to protect him, but he insisted on attending charity events, visiting impoverished communities, and participating in campaigns that raised funds for hospitals, schools, and shelters. He was often wheeled around, but when he appeared, the crowd rose to its feet. He was no longer the invincible boxer, but rather the man who had proven, with every gesture, that greatness was not measured solely by belts. It was the humble look of someone who knew that life is short, but legacy is eternal. A remarkable episode occurred in 1996. During the opening of the Atlanta Olympic Games, Ali, already visibly affected by Parkinson's, was chosen to light the Olympic torch. The entire stadium fell into absolute silence as he watched him tremble, fighting against his own body, but determined to fulfill that symbolic moment. As he raised the torch, millions of people around the world wept. He wasn't just the greatest boxer in history holding a flame. He was a man showing that, even weakened, he still had the strength to inspire. For many, that moment was the defining image of his life. The courage to face not only rivals but human frailty itself. Even after this historic moment, Ali didn't stop. He created the Muhammad Ali Center in Louisville, a space dedicated not only to his career but, above all, to the values he championed: respect, generosity, courage, and compassion. The center became a place of learning where young people from around the world could learn about his story but also reflect on how they could, in their own lives, fight for the right causes. "This place isn't about me," Ali said at the inauguration. "It's about everyone who believes they can change the world, even if it's just one person's world." During his later years, he also became involved in campaigns against hunger, racism, and world peace. He participated in meetings with religious and political leaders, advocating for unity among peoples. He no longer spoke as much, but when he did, each word carried the weight of truth. My fight is no longer in the ring, he said in a rare interview. My fight is against hatred, injustice, and indifference. These words, spoken with effort, became an echo that continues to this day. Many advised him to rest, to retreat to his mansion, to live his final years in silence. But Ali knew no rest. For him, living without purpose was like dying alive. Even frail, he continued to participate in charity events, smiling at children, taking photos with humble families, and always repeating the same lesson. True greatness lies not in how much you conquer, but in how much you give to the world. When he passed away in 2016, the entire world stopped. Presidents, religious leaders, athletes, and millions of ordinary people paid tribute. But perhaps the truest tributes came from those who once silently received his help. The families who found envelopes on their doorsteps. The children who were able to study thanks to his support. The sick who received treatment paid for by him. The refugees who survived because the champion did not ignore their pain. In the end, Muhammad Ali's last fight wasn't against Joe Frazier, George Foreman, or any other boxing giant. His last fight was against indifference. A fight he won not with punches, but with gestures of humanity. And that victory, unlike any title won in the ring, will never be erased, because in the hearts of every person he helped, the lesson Ali himself left behind forever echoes. Service to others is the rent you pay for the space you occupy on earth.